All right, will everybody please take their seats? I want to welcome everyone to our Martin Luther King Day program. My name is Bob Jacobson. I'm the co-president of Baltimore Jewish Cultural Chavurah. The other co-president is in the back at the sign-in table, Fred Pincus. The Chavurah, by the way, means community. So we are Baltimore Jewish Cultural Community. We are the only secular humanistic Jewish organization in Baltimore. And if you need to know what that means, I'm not going to tell you right now. We have business cards in the back with our website on it. We have a handout that explains more of what we are, with a calendar of events for the winter. And please pick those up. One of the core values of secular humanistic Judaism is social justice, and the belief that it is our actions alone which can bring about change. So what greater leader in the struggle for social justice could we honor than Martin Luther King Jr.? Many people think of him as a great visionary, which he was, a great orator, which he was, but many people, especially young people, forget that Dr. King was a great activist. I used to work in the Baltimore City schools, and a lot of times I would hear, we would ask the kids, what do you know about Martin Luther King? And they would say, he had a dream. Or he gave a good speech. Many times they don't realize what an activist he was. And that it was that activism by him and thousands of others who brought about the changes in civil rights. We are very fortunate to have found three activists, veterans of that struggle, in our midst in Baltimore to speak to us today. The three speakers you see before you, all Jewish women. To my left, Del Sweeney, who at the time was Del Greenblatt from New York City, one of 436 people who took part in the Freedom Rides. Helene Ageloff, originally from Buffalo, then Washington, D.C., also a Freedom Rider. Del and Helene actually met in prison in Mississippi. And on my far left, Carol Frank, who along with her husband Sandy and several others were congregants at Baltimore Hebrew Congregation who answered the call of their rabbi, Morris Lieberman, to help desegregate Baltimore. She was among the 283 people arrested for protesting to integrate Gwynn Oak Amusement Park. I just want to mention also that the way we found out about these speakers was through two articles in a magazine from the Jewish Museum of Maryland called Generations, which I have here and we will have for sale later on after the question and answer period. This is an excellent journal of the history of struggles for social justice in Baltimore, in the Baltimore Jewish community and beyond. So there was an excellent article in here by Gilbert Sandler about activist rabbis in the civil rights movement, which included the information on Carol Frank and others, and an excellent interview with Helene Ageloff and her husband Larry, who was also involved in a different aspect of the civil rights movement, by Deborah Rudisil, who's here, who has written a book on the history of Sparrows Point Steel Mill, correct? That's where we found out about Helene. Helene led us to Del Sweeney, and we found out about Carol Frank from this also. And here's our format. Each speaker will speak for 10 or 15 minutes. We will then have a question and answer period. And after that, we will have a little reception with light refreshments. Feel free to hang around. People who belong to the Chavurah should have on large round buttons like mine here, and feel free to ask any of us about the group. Also, if you would like to make a donation, we have a donation can at the table in the back for Jewish recovery houses, which is our, each year our Chavurah picks a cause or charity to which to donate funds, and that's our pick for this year. Please turn off all electronic devices. If you absolutely have to make a phone call, please take it outside into the cold. Restrooms, just a little housekeeping, other housekeeping. If you need the restroom, please go down the corridor, out that door, and down the corridor. You'll see it on the right. And I think that's it. We're ready to start. We're going to start with Del Sweeney. Do you need the mic?
Yes. Thank you, Bob. Good morning. As Bob mentioned, Helene and I were Freedom Riders and met in Hinds County Jail in Mississippi. We hadn't seen each other for 50 years because, like many women, we married, we changed our names. And so although I'd been here for 20 years in Baltimore, I didn't know Helene was here. And this year, because it's the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Rides, there was a reunion, and so Helene and I reconnected, and we've been inseparable ever since. The Freedom Rides occurred in the summer of 1961. I am not an extemporaneous speaker. I hope you will forgive. I have extensive notes here. Helene and I thought it would be useful to talk a little bit about the background of the Freedom Rides. I think everyone is probably familiar with some of the events that preceded the rides. The Brown versus Board of Education decision, Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, and then the sit-ins at lunch counters that started in 1960, actually 1958, in Kansas, in Oklahoma, and in North Carolina. But for the Freedom Ride, there was actually an earlier precursor. In 1944, Irene Morgan, who was a 27-year-old African-American, actually born in Baltimore, was arrested and jailed in Virginia for refusing to give up her seat on a Greyhound bus to a white person. She really fought when they tried to drag her off the bus. She was arrested and convicted, and her case was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, which ruled that state laws requiring segregation in interstate transportation were illegal. This was in 1946. So in 1947, a relatively newly formed group, the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, which was then in Chicago, decided to test this ruling by riding in integrated situations on interstate buses in the Upper South, in Virginia, in North Carolina. In North Carolina, they ran into trouble. They were beaten and arrested several times. Bayard Rustin, who was one of the stalwarts of the civil rights movement, was one of the people arrested and sentenced to 22 days on a chain gang in North Carolina. Another activist there was a Jewish man, Yigal Rudenko, and both Rustin and Rudenko appeared in court in North Carolina. The judge, Henry Whitfield, sentenced Rustin to merely paying court costs on the grounds that he was a poor, misled Negro from the North. And then he sentenced Rudenko, who was white, to 30 days on the chain gang, saying, "I presume you're Jewish, Mr. Rudenke. Well, it's about time you Jews from New York learned you can't come down here bringing your niggers with you to upset the customs of the South." The second case after Morgan was Boynton versus Virginia. Bruce Boynton was a Howard University law student who deliberately attempted to desegregate a Trailways terminal restaurant in Richmond, Virginia in 1958. He traveled from Washington, got off during a rest stop for the bus, went into the white part of the restaurant and refused to move when he was asked to leave. His conviction was overturned by the Supreme Court in 1960 in a decision written by Hugo Black. And this extended the Morgan decision from mandating that segregation on interstate transportation vehicles was illegal to outlawing the state, to nullifying the state laws that mandated segregation in terminal facilities, restrooms and restaurants. But what was clear to civil rights activists is that these rulings were not being enforced, and so that was the direct stimulus for the Freedom Rides of 1961, to test these decisions by going not only to the upper South, but also to the deep South, and particularly South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi. The first Freedom Ride left Washington on May 4th. I don't know if you have seen the PBS documentary on the Freedom Rides. It was shown in May. It's really excellent. Many of the Freedom Riders speak on camera. It's based on a book on the Freedom Riders by Raymond Arsenal, which is a very comprehensive discussion of the events. The ride was left by James Farmer, the director of CORE, and he and James Peck had both been on the earlier journey of reconciliation. There were minor incidents in Virginia and North Carolina. John Lewis was now a congressman, was on the bus and was attacked in Rock Hill, South Carolina. But the real violence began in Alabama, where it was deliberately organized by the Klan in concert with local police. And they planned 2 attacks, one in Anniston, Alabama. If you've seen the PBS documentary, this is where the bus was burned. It was attacked and burned with the riders still on it. And it was only because there was an explosion at the back of the bus that the people outside who were trying to hold the doors closed so that the riders couldn't get off. When the explosion occurred, everyone fell back and the riders were able to stagger off the bus with serious smoke inhalation. In Birmingham, this is where Bull Connor, the police commissioner, assured the Klan that they could have 15 minutes undisturbed to attack the Freedom Riders, and 15 minutes was what they got, and they were attacked by a mob with pipes and baseball bats. The riders were very badly beaten. A Justice Department representative, John Siegenthaler, was attacked and left unconscious on the street. Reporters and photographers from newspapers were beaten up first so that there would not be a record of this. The Freedom Riders were determined to continue the ride. There was a problem. They finally had an escort to Montgomery. After that, the Greyhound bus drivers refused to take the riders any further. And the people on the bus felt that they had no option but just to continue the ride, to discontinue the ride and fly to New Orleans where everyone was going to rendezvous. This is the point where SNCC comes in, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They felt that if the ride was given up at that point, that it would be a huge setback to the movement. And so they began to recruit riders and send them out down on additional buses. And the strategy was deliberately to fill up the jails. They recruited riders, particularly from colleges, and in the end there were more than 400 Freedom Riders from all over the country. A large proportion of riders from the North, the white riders from the North, were Jewish, many, and a very large number were college students, and many of these were just 18 or 19 years old.